Okay. Um, so this is our action plan for the U.S. prisons destruction of BIPOC communities. I'm Ellie.
I'm Dakari,
I'm Sarah.
Um,
and our other group
Next slide,
member is
Dakari.
Shaun.
So basically, the mass incarceration of people of color began with slavery back in the 1800s, and then eventually continued with the Jim Crow laws in the early 1920s. And then snowballed kind of into the war on drugs, which started in 1971 with President Nixon, kind of like targeting the use of marijuana across the United States. Um, that then sort of led into President Reagan's administration in the 1980s, with a new drug called crack cocaine, which took over African American communities in particular. Um, While most people who did use the drug were arrested, Black and Latino were the ones who were mainly targeted, especially by police. Um, and so basically, the war on drugs that was mainly carried out by Reagan and Nixon, was basically just kind of created to dismantle marginalized communities, and it was targeted towards people of color. And so this combined with police brutality, has created a system that has gone from 300,000 people in prison to 2.3 million just over 45 years. Um, and also, African American adults are 5.9 times more likely to be incarcerated than white adults. So that kind of goes to show how mass incarceration does target African Americans and people of color rather than white people. While making up 13% of the population, Black Americans are nearly 6 times more incarcerated. Latinx communities are 18% of the population that are incarcerated at double the rate. So this goes to show that the war on drugs in combination with kind of institutionalized racism um, targets these kind of communities and disrupts them. And so the personal impact of this social issue would be that it is tearing apart BIPOC communities by locking away, family members, friends, and essentially just parts of the community. And I know that this is something that we have all kind of seen in like the news headlines, especially recently with police brutality coming out. Mass incarceration is sort of like a huge contributor to institutionalized racism. Um, and since we are all like pre-social work students, this affects like the main communities that we will be working with. And I know that certain types of social workers, such as a correctional social worker or possibly a parole officer, would be the types of careers that will be directly working with these communities. And prolonged abuse of communities of color can trickle into other areas in policing, as we've seen a spike in police brutality in general. Um, these communities are dying, and that will affect the middle class greatly as a whole. It also, I think it affects everyone, even people who aren't people of color, because I know, take George Floyd for example. There were lots of people, white people protesting. There was a lot of white people who also witnessed it and had, videographed, and there was like children who witnessed it. So I think it's something that affects everyone, even if you aren't a part of the BIPOC community.
What we have for action steps really takes into account the public action one can take and the action that one in the social work community can take as well. Like Ellie said, because we are all pre-social work students, even if we're not all going into the field, it's important to have the knowledge of social work and social issues, especially when it comes to injustice. And in this time, because this issue is so prevalent, it's been prevalent throughout the years, but now more than ever, the issue of police brutality and mass incarceration in BIPOC communities is a very, very relevant topic. And so now is the time to take action. Even if it's not something you think you have the power to do, we have some steps that we think could help even just the public community do little by little to improve this issue. One of these topics is just approaching communities of color with the knowledge and context of current race issues as a social worker, and even as just a normal community member. Because class and, social class, and it's really something that separates people. And we know that systemic racism pushes people of color down into sort of the lower class to middle class. So we are still all separated. What people can do as a community is approach the different sections of the community with the context of systemic racism and the context of how our economy pushes people down in order to come up with better conclusions and better conversations about what this issue really means and how it impacts the present day communities in America. We can also tell the stories of those affected by police brutality and incarceration in the BIPOC communities of the world. One good thing that we have nowadays is social media. Many, many platforms that we can use to spread awareness and to tell the stories of those really affected by the racism and the prejudice in the United States. We've had things like this in the past. I think back to what we've learned about segregation and how the news outlets, as soon as they started broadcasting the police brutality of the time, change happened little by little. So if we continue on that path, we can keep things like this from being swept under the rug constantly, like they have been throughout the years. And the number one thing, I think in this, in this time of injustice and hidden brutality, hidden prejudice especially, is just to be informed and to know the statistics and the patterns of injustice, because one thing our history has a real issue with is repeating itself over and over again. As we've seen that slavery has become mass incarceration. It's just going to continue if we don't stay informed. So those are the main topics that I think can help us, overcome the current issues we have. Additional steps we have to that are just donating to or volunteering with the bail programs, nonprofits, the programs that work to, to help people that are wrongly convicted or sentenced, to help people that are fighting for justice just to be thrown into jail. We need to talk to and reach out to local government officials to create policies that fix the system and advocating for these people who aren't being heard. So just making those voices, amplifying the voices that are trying to speak out. We can create GoFundMes, attend and organize protests, and just come together with other people to mobilize for change. So working together with our communities is the best way we can overcome this. So the next steps we have supplied a few links to a few different sort of programming. The first link we have are just for supporting movements through safe and peaceful protests, even just donating. These donations can help bail out protesters who have been arrested. They can help people who have been wrongly arrested or criminalized, and just anything that the basic community can do. Social workers specifically, I think, can offer their time to work in BIPOC communities, and they can help make connections with people one-on-one to offer individualized support. They can help communities through each individual to help the community grow, to support one another. That way we can get those voices to be heard, and we can help solve this injustice little by little. And lastly, just finding nonprofits to work with. There are many, many different nonprofits out there just to help the BIPOC community in small ways, whether it's in housing, whether it's in protest, incarceration. There are so many resources out there that I think just the public community can reach out to and help to, push the support from all sides.
So to wrap up everything that we kind of talked about in this presentation, to start off, the history of racial injustice and disparities within the prison system that have caused mass incarceration and this destruction of the BIPOC communities that we've been talking about is undeniable. It's happening, it's ongoing, and it's been happening since the end of slavery. like Ellie stated. Um, each day, there are people who are suffering from this unjust treatment at disproportionate rates, rates of incarceration, disproportionate rates of sentencing for similar crimes. There's fathers, mothers, and even children who are all feeling the effects of these dangerous tactics in this system of policing that we currently have. And without action, then there is no change. And so, similar to what we discussed throughout this presentation, there are many things that we can do as social workers and as members of the community to push for change and take action and mobilize by stepping up, reaching out, and putting forth the effort as a community. As we realize that this is an issue that affects us all as a whole, um, we can begin to start making some sort of change and make steps into the right direction. That can come from, like we talked about, reaching out to your representatives in your local governments. Um, that can come from mobilizing with your community for protests, or creating GoFundMe's, or just finding nonprofits that you can help and volunteer with, and help to work towards some sort of prison reform and exonerating those who have been unjustly imprisoned or incarcerated. Um, we can create a system that benefits everyone equitably and equally by taking steps like these, and educating ourselves on the ways that racism affects these communities, as well as how it affects us when we talk about social work and our future career paths. It's important to understand that this issue does not end until it ends for everyone. So until no one is suffering, then we all suffer in a sense. And we're all going to feel the effects of harmful systems like this, like the prison system currently. And it's important that we come together and amplify the voices of those that are most affected, as they're not being heard currently. So with that said, these are some of our references.